Okay, so The Tempest. Um, uh, Getting started on The Tempest. So there's basically two. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through some bits and pieces of the play, um, because I'm interested. Just like when we did Othello. I mean, obviously, I could talk about this place forever. I could never stop. I mean, we there's so much more I could do with Othello, and I may still go back and do more. Um, but the thing I'm interested in with Othello was Iago. There are two things I'm interested in The Tempest. Um, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through all the things that relate to the first thing I'm interested in, and then we're going to start all over at the beginning again, and I'm going to go through a totally different set of things, the second set of things that I'm interested in. So the Tempest, just the basic outline of it is that there is a wizard who is living on an island. He's sort of stranded there with his daughter. Um, and his enemies who exiled him to this island, they thought they killed him, but he escaped to a magic island. They show up. Coincidentally, their boat goes past, so he shipwrecks the boat, and they all crash land on the island. And then Prospero's like, now I will have my revenge on these fuckers. There's two other people with Prospero on the island. Well, he's got his daughter, obviously, I mentioned, but there's two magical creatures with him on the island. One is a kind of creature called Caliban, who is hard to describe, but he's he's sort of like a half fish beast monster thing. The movie makes him look kind of like a rock monster a little bit. And the other creature is Ariel, and Ariel is like a fairy sprite flying around doing illusions kind of creature. And so Prospero strands all these people on the island, and then he separates them up into groups, and he starts fucking with them because they ruined his life and put him on this island. But it's a love story because one of the people crash landed on the island is Ferdinand, a young prince, and he falls in love with Prospero's daughter. And the play has a happy ending. I'll tell you now because I know you guys we don't want to see some happy stuff, so it has a happy ending. Nobody dies. It's nice. Okay, so let's get started looking at the Tempest. Oh, I'll tell you about it later. Okay, I'm ready to get started. That's basically the summary. Okay, so the first thing I want to draw your attention to is something that I promise you, if you read this, you wouldn't care about. Most people that read it don't care about it. They don't notice it. It's not interesting. They speed right past it. Who gives a shit? But I give a shit. You know me. I care about all kinds of things people don't care about. So let's take a look at it. On page 1, the first thing I want to draw your attention to is something that absolutely doesn't matter. It begins with a massive, see, there's a noise and thunder and lightning and the shipmaster. So it opens up on the ship that's offshore of the island, and all the boatswain is the guy in charge of the boat, and these are all these rich people. Alonso's Alonso and Antonio and Gonzalo. These are all like rich folks on the boat. And so they're terrible things. The storm is raging, and they're worried the ship is going to sink, and they're all going to fucking die. And everybody's shouting. And one of the funny things in the scene is that the rich people are like bossing the poor people around. But like the rich people need the poor people to live. Like if the poor people don't, the regular people, the everyday people don't get this boat working, they're all going to sink. And the ocean doesn't care whether you're a king or whether you're the janitor on the ship. If it sinks, everybody dies. So they're yelling at them, and the poor people are like, listen, you may think, you may be able to command people, but you can't command the ocean. And then there's this really minor detail that nobody cares about. I just want to draw your attention to it. I underlined it right here. It's not a line of dialogue. It is a stage direction. It is a little note about what the characters are doing. Now, you guys know from Othello, those are pretty rare. Usually, Shakespeare does not spend a lot of time describing what characters are supposed to do. The scripts that we have are basically everything that they say. But this is one of those rare moments where Shakespeare actually puts something in here that apparently describes what's happening. And the stage direction is this. Enter more mariners. That's mariners are people that work on a ship. Enter more mariners wet. Now, why do I give a shit about this? It is such an uninteresting thing. Of course they're wet. It's fucking raining. But it's an amazing moment. It's an amazing moment in Shakespeare, and it tells you a really important detail about what kind of play this is. Now, for starters, I'm going to tell you something that you wouldn't know if you didn't do a little bit of research, and I'll just tell it to you now, which is that The Tempest is one of Shakespeare's very last plays. It's one of the final plays that he wrote before he retired. Shakespeare did not, he retired. He was the greatest author who ever lived, and he was just like, yeah, I'm done, I'm leaving. And he retired. The Tempest is one of his last plays. And Enter Mariners Wet is such an interesting thing to put in a play in these days. You don't care about it because you're used to seeing movies. And movies have, special effects budgets, and they're basically realistic movies. But the stage in Shakespeare's day was not realistic. What happened in Shakespeare's day is that it was, first of all, they didn't have lighting. They didn't have spotlights because it's 400 years ago. They didn't have electricity. Well, they had electricity, but they didn't know how to make it into light bulbs. So they it was just a big stage. They didn't have any sets. It was just empty. So you would go to see the play, and it would just be outdoors in the middle of the afternoon. There'd be an audience is surrounding this stage on all sides, on three sides, and the actors just stand on this empty stage and they just say shit, and that's the whole play. There are no sets, and there are no special effects. It's just people talking, and that's the play. I realize to many of you that sounds incredibly boring because you live in a culture of images. Our culture is obsessed with images. Instagram, for example, is just flipping through images. You see more images in a single week than people from the Renaissance saw in their entire fucking lives. Their culture was different. Their culture 400 years ago was a culture of words. It's hard to imagine, but these were people who mandatory church attendance, mandatory Bible reading. These people read the Bible, those weren't the ones that could read, but they went to hear sermons about the Bible. And when you go to church every day, when you go to church all the time and you hear preachers talking to you all the time from childhood, you get really good at understanding words through the ear. We're not good at that because we don't do that. We're very good at understanding things through the eye. When you're rushing to catch your subway train, and you see signs that say, oh, the queue is down on weekends and late nights, you can very quickly look at that and be like, yep, that doesn't apply to me. But if you've ever seen tourists who aren't used to it, and they sit there and read all the signs, they don't understand, this is not your train and this is not that weekend. So they were very good at words. We're very good at images. What you're seeing here is something really interesting in Shakespeare. Which is, and by the way, don't listen to people who tell you that people back then were smarter. They're not smarter. They were just a different kind of smart. They were smart with words and we're smart with images. I think it's good to be smart with both. But Enter Mariner's Wet is such an interesting moment because it indicates what kind of play this is. This is a special effects extravaganza. This is Shakespeare's attempt to make a massive, crazy blockbuster illusion thing. The fact that usually the actors got all, what did they dump buckets of water on them and push them on stage? That's not something plays normally did. There weren't special effects in these things, but here, a shipwreck occurring at the beginning of the play, and they've got lightning and they've got thunder. And by the way they made thunder in these places, they took a cannonball and they rolled it down like a trough, like a metal tube, like a half tube of metal that was all dented, and they would roll the cannonball down and it would make thunder sounds. But the fact that the mariners enter wet tells you something about this play, which is Shakespeare is attempting to do something really that wasn't done so much, which is to create a kind of realistic, exciting thing. It is not easy to create the illusion of a shipwreck on a stage 400 years ago. Now today, you would just slap that motherfucker into a computer and you would CGI the fuck out of it. And if you watch the movie version of The Tempest, that's exactly what they do. But they didn't do that back then. They just asked the audience to imagine the mariners are wet. But Shakespeare is like, no, they're actually wet. He's got them, because normally you're supposed to imagine they've gotten all wet, but here Shakespeare's actually dumping water on the actors before they go on stage. This is a level of realism and a level of excitement, a level of spectacle that is unusual in plays of the period. And so it tells you the type of play The Tempest is. I want you to think about The Tempest as being like a big special effects blockbuster. Othello was just people talking to each other and fighting. But The Tempest has magical. First Tempest is about a wizard who casts spells. He has like a magical creature assistant named Ariel. There's some kind of rock fish caveman monster named Caliban. This is a bonkers special effects extravaganza, and there's all kinds of monsters that show up and illusions and things, and we'll talk about that as we go. It's a very fun, crazy play. Okay, see you in the next video.